Hi.
Hi, welcome everyone. We've got Judith
Oh,
joining us
good.
now. Had a little moment there where we were trying to get her back. Welcome. Let us know, as I was saying, let us know in the chat where you're joining us from, what time it is. It's 4:30 for me. I'm in lovely sunny Barbados. Judith, where are you?
I'm in South Wales in the UK and it's 8:30 at night for me, so dark and rainy here.
Well, thank you for joining us so late in the evening, and thank you everyone for coming, whatever time it is for you. We've got a great session this afternoon. We're going to be doing language tree, making the most of your resources with the wonderful Judith John. We're hoping that by the end of the session, all of you will be familiar with all of the resources available for you for Language Tree Third Edition, and that you'll be super comfortable using them and making the most of them. Um, I am going to share into the chat the flyer and the code to let you to access them. And I know that Judith will be talking a bit more about that. So I will hand over to you, Judith, to get started.
Lovely. Thanks, Elliot. And welcome everyone who's joined so far. I'll just set up to share my screen so you can see the PowerPoint I've created for you. Okay, so hopefully now you'll see a PowerPoint slide on the screen and I'll talk through these as we go forth. I've got the chat feature open too, so it's nice to see everyone joining and saying hello. Feel free to keep doing that as you join. If you have any questions, just drop them in, and I'll pause at a few stages throughout the webinar for you to ask questions or give any comments you might want to give. So, as Elliot said, my name's Judith. I'm in South Wales at the moment in the United Kingdom. I worked as an English teacher in England for several years, and then started working in educational publishing in 2011. And now I work mainly as a freelance writer, editor, and trainer. I'm quite new to Macmillan. I've been working for them for 2 years now. I joined the language tree team of Julia, Sandra, and Leonie Bennett, who asked me to help them adapt language tree for Belize. So we've done the lower and middle divisions. We're just finishing off the upper division, and I'll be coming out to Belize next week to work with the teachers and talk about delivering language tree to them. So that'll be really nice. It'll be my third visit. I also worked on these online resources last year, updating the second edition of the books to tailor them to the third edition. So the third edition of these online resources are the ones I'll be looking at with you today. If you're still using the second edition textbooks, that's fine. You'll see hopefully some similarities, but there may be some updated or different content. But hopefully there'll still be some useful tips in this webinar. So next slide. Just want to give you the aims of the session and some nice pictures there, the language tree books. So our aims are for you, the teachers, to become more familiar with the online resources, the Language Tree Third Edition, and to help you use these online resources to support the learning of language arts, both in and out of the classroom. So we are primarily focusing on teachers who are new to these resources to help you become more familiar with them. So if you're already using the resources, it might not be quite so relevant, but I'll also be showing or giving suggestions on ways of using these materials to support the language tree textbooks in and out of the classroom. So hopefully it'll give you some additional ideas to try in your own teaching. I always found when I was teaching, and I know this is true for my fellow teachers too, that I would spend a lot of time looking for online or for creating additional materials for my students myself, or adapting existing ones that the school had. So, and I know, as I said, my fellow teachers did the same. So having these batches of online resources already available are incredibly useful, I think, because they've got ready-made materials set for you, which are tailored to your textbooks and you know and can be confident that they deliver the same curriculum objectives. So I wondered how many of you actually used any of these online resources in your teaching. So if you want to put a little note in the chat to say if you've used any of them or if you're completely new to them, I thought that would be useful. And if please feel free to share if you have used them, some of your ideas of how you've used them, when you've used them, and what works for you and your students. Because I'd love to be able for some teachers to take your ideas and try them themselves. We'll be doing looking back at the chat at a few stages in the webinar as well, so I'll be able to pick up on anything you say. Okay, our next slide has a bit more detail, and I think this is what Elliot's going to has shared on how to access these materials. So obviously they're not good to you if you can't get to them. So we want you to visit the Macmillan Education website. There's a code you can see on the screen in front of you if you want to take a screenshot, but it will be available later. And there's a QR code. You do need to register if you're new or log in if you're familiar with these. And then you can add new course and add the code that's shown, and that'll bring up the Language Tree Language Arts Third Edition resources. And then if you go to your bookshelf section, select the course title, and then view, you'll get all the teacher resources available for all of the grades for language arts. And they're really easy and quick to download. Oh, thanks for putting the code up. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a few of the steps to access these materials in a bit more detail. Here you can see this is my personal bookshelf, and in the centre, the Language Tree Language Arts for the Caribbean Third Edition tab. And just to say, if you have any problems at this stage, you can see at the bottom of the screen, there's a help centre. You can click on that, which is quite useful for more tips. So I'll be clicking on the centre tab, which will take me to this next screen. And here I can view or access the materials online. Or if you can see the top tab, you can get the app now, which you can download to your PC or your phone. And I think it's great that there are several options available for this. Oops, sorry, I need to go back one. If you see on the blue screen on the bottom of the blue box, sorry, at the bottom of the screen, it's not very big, I know, but you've got options there for desktop, Windows or Mac. You've got options for the tablet or the smartphone. So whatever device you have available, you can access these materials, put the app on that correct device, and then you've got it with you all the time, which is really useful. And next, now this is if I've clicked through into the tab, you can see down the bottom of the screen, I've got Students Book 1 highlighted, and there's all of the grades go down. And then within that, for each grade, there's a lesson plan tab, an assessment tab, and a miscellaneous tab. So I'm going to start with a miscellaneous tab because it gives you, I think it's a good place to start, gives you some really useful general documents for each grade. And that's what we'll start by looking at next. When I was looking at these and planning this webinar for you, I was thinking to myself, how can I ensure my students can learn using language arts for the Caribbean series in any environment? And this is partly why these documents were created in the first place. So to start you with the support document, this gives a lot of information on why these resources were created and how they can be used. And a big part of why these materials were created was to offer support during coronavirus. And obviously, its incredibly negative effect on schools and learning. It's incredibly difficult for everyone. And we think it's still really important to have these resources in place because while COVID is over, there may be future events such as a pandemic, an extreme weather event, which could affect how children are able to attend school. And also increasingly, it's not just if students are out of school. I think it's increasingly helpful to provide our students with extra support and alternatives for their everyday learning, even in the classroom. And I think these resources are really valuable for this way of teaching as well. So, for example, students may not be able to attend school for some reasons, but it may be very hard for them to work in their home environment. And this could be down to practical reasons, such as a lack of reliable internet, not being able to access an electronic device such as a laptop or tablet. There may also be family circumstances which are just not conducive to students learning at home. So the aim of the support document, as well as the other materials, is to allow the students to learn using the textbooks in any situation. If the textbooks state that students should learn in pairs or groups, which you'll often see in the Language Tree series, The support document gives suggestions on how this teaching can be adapted where necessary to allow students to complete the activities in a different way, often in a more self-led way. So they're still achieving the outcomes, just in a different way. The support documents contain alternatives to several tasks for this first 6 units of each of the grades. So these allow you or your students to adapt the learning methods as necessary for hopefully any situation. I want to use an example to give you an idea in more detail. So this is for grade 1, and these are some ways in which tasks which involve speaking to others or working in pairs or groups can be adapted. So to just explain what you're looking at, the top of the screen, the 3 icons are from the support document and indicate when activities should be done as whole class teaching. So those are the ones in green, or the green icon, sorry, either in class or at home, which is purple, or if students are not able to attend school and are working from home, which is the ones in red. And ideally, it says students at home will be supported by an adult, especially for younger students where they may struggle to access the materials independently. However, if this isn't possible, you could make further suggestions yourself to adapt the exercises. So, and that at the bottom of the screen, on the left, we can see a speaking and listening task from grade 1. This is from unit 1. And this is actually a screenshot from the textbook from page 10. So you can see exactly what was in the textbook. And then next to it on the right is an alternative task from the support document. So in the content on the left from the textbook, we can see the talk together icon of 2 students' heads and the speech bubble that we should be familiar with from the textbooks. And that indicates where students discuss or ask or answer questions, which is what they're doing in this activity. And on the right, we see that if this isn't possible, if the student's at home, this is the alternative. So it shows how the task has been adapted for students to do at home. So the outcome of students creating answers and sentences is still there, but they do it in a different way. And looking at the red icon there, I'll read it out just in case it's a bit small. If you're working at home, ask your grown-up to read your sentence, which the student will have written. So if I knew a student was likely to be working independently at home, here I might ask the students to write their sentences of what they like to do after school. And then when they're back in the classroom, they could read out their sentences to me. So they're achieving the same thing, just in a different way. I was thinking as well, I would actually find these very useful for some of my students in the classroom. So if for the purple version, students writing a sentence instead of asking and answering in a pair or in the classroom, I would use these in the classroom for students who are very reluctant speakers. I think anyone working as a teacher today needs to manage classrooms, which may include students of increasingly varied needs. So to have these options on how students work can be very helpful. And I'm not saying that students should never work in the way set out in the textbook just because they find them challenging. That's how we learn and grow. And of course, that some of these skills, as they are set out in the textbooks, are necessary outcomes in language arts. But on some occasions, especially for perhaps for grade 1, unit 1, when they're very early and all in their learning, it can be very valuable to allow students options for how they learn. So in this situation, a shy or reluctant speaker can choose to write their sentence, then perhaps tell it to you, the teacher, rather than talking with a partner, which they may feel reluctant or unable to do. So adapting the task in this way allows them to succeed rather than doing nothing or very little in the talking in the partner task. And hopefully it means they'll gain confidence, which can be built on in future speaking and listening tasks. So I'd recommend you to look through these in ways so they're not just for alternatives when students aren't in the classroom. They can be used in the classroom to adapt the learning as it is set out in the books. And probably you do things like this anyway for your students, but looking at the support document for these ideas will give you some ready-made options. The next part of the document that's in the miscellaneous section is the teaching tips document. And there's one of these for each grade, and these give further ideas or information of the key learning for each grade. So for example, what you're looking at here are some of the reading tips given for grade 1. These include information on how the reading passages can be the basis for discussions on different cultures or good morals. There's an example of how to manage the whole class while you're delivering guided group reading. And at the bottom, there are some useful tips you can teach your students on supporting one another while reading so that they get the most from the reading experience. These teaching tips documents include several sections taught in Language Tree, so you'll see examples or content for reading, comprehension, language and writing, and also some more general teaching tips on ways of delivering materials in an active way. These tend to be more grammar related content in these documents as they go through the grades, they get to the higher grades, picking up, for example, on teaching elements of grammar that may be tricky for students, or where there are grammatical differences between Creole or other home languages and Standard English that students need to be aware of. So the documents in this miscellaneous section basically give you more background and ideas to support your students that you might all have previously had to look up separately and spend time finding. So I recommend you having a look through these documents, sitting maybe one quiet afternoon, sitting down and reading through them, or just dipping into them for certain ideas for a topic or class as you need to. Next slide. So now we're in the teaching pack section, and this is the teaching pack and the assessments make up the main body of these online resources. These are available for each grade and for each unit. So I wanted to make sure you're all familiar with them and can see the type of information and materials we've got for you. So as we only have an hour together, I'm not going to show an example from every grade. We've looked at some short, brief information from grade 1, and now we're looking at a grade 3 example. But I hope that by doing this, they'll give you a good idea of the content you can expect when you look through the materials for your grade. So this one from grade 3 shows you at the start of each teaching pack, we've got this syllabus map chart, which shows how the unit content links to the OECS syllabus using the codes from that syllabus, and they're covered in each of the language tree sections. There are also links to the relevant student book and workbook pages, so you've got easy access to those, and to any additional online resources that have been provided for you. And there's none for this lesson or unit, but I'll show you an example of these later because there's some good content there too. And what we've got next are some suggested activities. These come in the teaching packs. So just to tell you again what you've got on the screen. For this unit in grade 3, unit 5, on the right, there's a screenshot of the student book content. That's page 36 of student book grade 3. And on the left are the additional suggestions from the online teaching pack from grade 3 from unit 5. So you might begin this unit and lesson by looking at the listen up feature in the textbook. So under that orange banner, we've got the teacher talk icon there. So the teacher will have read something, students will be listening, and then they'll be making notes or discussing in pairs to answer those questions. And this one focuses on the audience and purpose of different text, and that how we speak can change depending on the audience and purpose we're speaking to. And we've got our turtle tip feature there as well to give a bit more information for students. So then if you wanted, you could carry on using the textbook, going in through the reading section, or you could look in the teaching pack and you could use the online resource pre-reading activity you can see on your left. So again, hopefully it's big enough that you can all see this, but it suggests that students have a whole class discussion about what they do when they clean up, why it's important to keep places around us clean, how we can encourage others to clean up, and what the world would be like or look like if we never cleaned up. So I think that's a really nice one, how it goes from what's very immediate and individual, for the students, very relatable to them in their immediate environment, which they're familiar with. But then it goes around to consider their place in the world and how we can all do our small bit to make a difference, and how terrible it would be if no one ever cleaned up after themselves. So this is a nice way into the unit, and you might also link this discussion to the reading text and an image. I thought what I might do next was ask students to predict what happened by looking at the picture of the classroom shown. So you can see there we've got students and a teacher. He's holding some rubbish. So it's very likely that they were left in the classroom or the school somewhere, and he's talking to the students about this. At the bottom of the screen then, we've got an extension activity. So here, if you had the time and the resources, you could also deliver this extension activity of getting the students to organise their own cleanup day. This could just be done in the class, as it says, or they could involve other students in classes and make this a whole school activity, perhaps. So this works well throughout this unit. This idea of cleaning up and being responsible for cleaning up your own environment is covered. And at the end of the unit, students will have thought about delivering a cleanup day in their school because they write a report on a possible cleanup day for their end of unit writing tasks. So it might be nice to do that extension activity at the end of the unit if you had time. Or you could even make it a bigger, more substantial extended task, which runs in parallel to the teaching of the whole unit. And I thought there might be some nice cross-curricular links you could make there too. So the teaching pack content can be delivered in different ways and is designed to be flexible and to build upon the unit skills and themes that you'll see. So here now we have an example of an assessment for grade 3. Each unit, and for each grade as well, for each unit has a test or an assessment page. I'm not sure how you can make out, I know this might be a bit small, sorry, but the assessments tend to focus on the language and word work skills for each unit. So for this unit in language, students learn about identify and use pronouns, and that's mirrored here in exercise 1. And in word work, students choose synonyms to replace words with the same meanings. And that's tested in exercise 2, where they have to choose these synonyms and put them to replace words in each of the sentences. So for each grade and for each unit, there's a single page test with the mark scheme provided on it. So it makes it really easy to use and convenient. And you can use these in many different ways depending on the needs of your students. So I thought I'd share a few options which I might use these tests. Obviously, there's the content in the textbook students will have gone through, but this could be used in a more formative way to give students additional practice to assess how well they've taken in the language or word work content. And then if you feel they still need more content after that you've seen the marks they get from these, you could provide additional learning for areas that students may have struggled with. Or they could be used in a more summative fashion towards the end of the unit to monitor students' progress and how well they've picked up the skills and teaching of each unit. You could set them in the classroom as a formal test, perhaps give them to students as a home task, might be more suitable for older students. And they could even be set as an additional task in the lesson when students have finished other work. Although obviously there you'd need to consider what your own outcomes are. So if I wanted a benchmark for the whole class of students to check which ones had grasped certain concepts, I deliver it as the whole class as a more formal test. If I felt that most students had grasped a concept through going through the tasks in the student book, I might set this as extra practice for STEM students while the others did something else. Obviously, if your school has agreed on ways of using tests, then you should follow them. But if not, I'd say try out a few methods to see what works for you, because it would be a very valuable way of checking if your students benefit from this extra practice in a more summative way, or if it would be more helpful for them to get used to the type of more formal tests they might experience at the end of primary years or at the end of the primary education. I also quite like that marks are given for these. I thought another way in which I might use them is for students to self or peer mark them under my supervision. So they could be responsible for marking their own or each other's tests. And then they could use the information they get from them to create their own targets for future learning. So these assessments could really usefully be used to help students start to identify their own strengths and areas for development. So that's a really important skill that can be taken from these tests. So I've talked to you quite a bit in these past 20 minutes. I'd love to hear from you if you've got any comments on how you use these resources with the students at the moment, or from what you've seen, how you might like to use them in the classroom. So I'd love you to have a think and put a note in the chat, and I'll give you a few minutes and then I'll read some out and go through them, because this is a great example or great opportunity to share your ideas and your experience of using these with the class. Even if you never have, you could share how you might like to use them. So please add something to the chat and we can share it with the group. I'm just skimming through the chat too to see if I've missed any questions. Lots of people from all over. It's very nice. Nice to see. Thank you for coming. Please feel free to ask any questions you might have too. I'll just give you another minute if there's anything, or even if you'd like to put on, if you just never used these resources, weren't even really aware of them before this webinar, that would be useful. Jacqueline, thank you. I see that this will this be free for us? Yes, these are resources that are available for everyone who uses the Language Tree series. So not generally available, but for people who use the series, these resources are freely available to you. We had that QR code and entry code at the start, and I think Alia will be sharing that towards the end of the session again. So you'll be able to have a way in to access these and have a look around at them. Melissa, thanks for your comment. I'm not sure if this recording is made available after. Perhaps you can answer that one, Elliot. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I can see your note there. The recording will be made available to you all, so that's useful. Margaret, yeah, I like the colours too. Were you cut off there? Was there anything else you wanted to say? Interesting. Oh, just reading one from Michelle. Is it possible to have some of the worksheets interactive so the students can also access them? I don't think that's available at the moment. I'm going to suggest some ways for you giving these to students later, but as far as I know, they're not interactive yet, and I don't know if there are any plans for that at this time, sorry. Margaret, thanks. You use them for assessment near to a test, or you might do that. That's good to know. I think that's a really, excuse me, a really valuable way of doing that. Getting on using the link. Okay. Melita, I actually think we'll have a bit more time at the end. So I'll go back through how you can get back through and access these using the link. I'm not sure I'll be able to do it live using my link, but we can see about getting you some more information about accessing the materials. Valerie, I like how the student at home will achieve the same outcome if it's in school, but a different way. I like that too. I think it's really valuable. And while those aren't available for each of the units, they are available for the first 6 units. And it gives you a good idea of ways that you can adapt the materials in the later units yourselves. Oh, Jacqueline, thanks. If you download them and then upload them to Class Dojo, is that your virtual platform? That's a great idea. Going to suggest a few things like that myself too later. I think I'll carry on for now then. I wanted to show you some examples from student book grade 6 to show you again. I couldn't go through every grade because I just didn't have time. So I wanted to show you some different examples, and then we'll have some more time at the end for any more of your comments or your questions. So thanks for everyone who put a question or a comment on the chat there. Okay, so next slide. Here we go. So now we've got, as I said, a grade 6 example. On the left of the screen, you can see the teaching pack for grade 6, unit 10. So I wanted to pick one towards the end of primary language arts teaching, just to show you the difference. So on the left is the material from the teaching pack, and on the right is the related unit from the student's book. And this is page 114, sorry, unit 10, A Cow Called Boy. So in the teaching pack, you can see that there's the same layout here, which makes it really easy to use these resources. We start with the same syllabus map of topics listed in the language tree sections of reading, speaking and listening, and language and so forth. But if you look at the language section, especially, as we're looking at a higher grade now, the language topic has been broken down and split up into categories, which I think is a nice, useful touch. So we can see that this unit covers reported speech of the present, past, and future tenses, reviews direct speech, and we've got some work on commas there too. And again, we've got the same curriculum learning objective codes from the OECS syllabus map and curriculum. We've also got the page student book and workbook page references to make it easy for you to identify the curriculum learning and where it can be found in the relevant sections of the books. We've got a suggested starter activity below this one. I think it ties really nicely with the reading passage from the student book and is a nice way of getting students engaged from the beginning of the unit. So just in case you can't make out the text there, I'll read it out for you. The teaching pack starter activity suggests bringing a pet into class or asking students to share information about their own pets. And they then hold a class discussion on the pros and cons of keeping a pet. There's some really nice links you can make there. Again, perhaps cross-curricularly, or just having the responsibility of keeping a pet and what it means, especially for young children. And I thought perhaps if you weren't able to bring a pet into the classroom, you could easily adapt this to maybe show images of different pets and talk about how they might need to be cared for. Perhaps discuss the pros and cons of different pets also. I'm not sure you'll all be familiar with the story unless you teach grade 6. So this is A Cow Called Boy. It's a really nice story about how a boy called Josh brings his cow to school, which perhaps is a pet they won't have considered. So it's a nice different touch. And the story goes on to explain the teacher, obviously, I wouldn't have been happy if a student had brought a cow into my classroom. So Josh's teacher isn't happy, but he's able to talk about his pet for a while in the class. So the teaching pack activities can be adapted to suit your students as you might adapt any of the textbook content. So hopefully here they'll give you some ideas to start things off, but feel free to adapt these for your classroom or your situation as much as you need to. And just to show you, go back, if you refer back to the syllabus map, in the online resource section, this was empty in grade 3, but for this one we have a crossword. So I wanted to show you an example of this because I think they're another really great reason for looking through these and seeing what's available. Even if you just look for these extra resources, it should save you a lot of time in your teaching. So for this speaking and listening section of the unit, we've got some from the teaching pack here. On the left, we got the guidance on when they suggest you use the crossword, its aim, and how it should be completed. Obviously, again, you can adapt that if you want to, but I do like how this says this is beneficially to be done before the exercise on page 116 in the student book. So it tells you exactly where it's suggested to use these. And then on the right, you can see the crossword. And as you can see, it is a completely self-contained activity. You would probably need to print them out for students if you could, but I'm going to make a few other suggestions about that too. But what's nice is that it's completely tailored to the content of the student book, just wants to deliver this or reinforce that content in a different way. So there's an exercise in the book where students match words about books, such as the words novel or blurb or index, to the meanings. And here we've got the same words and the same definitions, but used in a crossword. So students are reinforcing what they did in the student book, or you can use this as providing an alternative way of teaching those same terms and definitions. So thinking about how or when you might use this, I might choose to give this to certain students who would benefit from reinforcing these terms and definitions. We've all got those students who often finish work before others. So this is really useful in those situations for you to just quickly access and give to those students who need something extra to do in the classroom while you're finishing work off with other students. I thought I could also easily give this to pairs. They could discuss the answers to each clue as they work through it and filled it in. If you were able, you could show it through a device in the classroom. Obviously, you could print out copies and do it that way. But if you couldn't and you had a device, you could do it that way. Or even, although it would be more time consuming, you could even copy it onto a board yourself for students to do as a whole class activity in the classroom. Although I suspect that would be better just as a whole class activity, it might be a bit distracting for students who are doing something else if you started doing that with some students in the classroom. So again, like the comment mentioned, there aren't interactive materials available yet, but I was thinking what might be good is for students, if you to set up a box in the classroom with additional resources, so it had some of these extra worksheets in, Or if your students had some computers in the classroom, there could be a computer folder where you've downloaded some of these resources from the online content. So students could be more self-manage any additional work they might need to do in the classroom there and just go and find something independently when they finished other work. I do think that would be better for the upper divisions when they got a bit more used to this way of working and are a bit more independent, but it's something you might want to try out in the classroom. So there are lots of these additional online resources pre-made for you. There's lots of crosswords, there's word searches, puzzles, charts to fill in, word cards to sort, sentence cards to complete, lots of options for you in the teaching packs, which you can use as additional or alternative resources. So I do encourage you to have a look and see what you think would be useful in your teaching. And even if you mainly just use these extra materials like the crossword from the teaching packs and tests, it means you don't have to find them or create these resources yourself. And you can be confident that they've been tailored to the exact learning outcomes for Language Tree. And just then wanted to show you an example of another assessment, and this one's from grade 6, unit 10, that same unit. So again, it's a one-page test. It's got the marks available, but you can see just by looking, even if you can't read all of this, that by the amount of content, that we've got more content here because this one's produced for the upper division. So this test is out of 16 marks rather than 10 marks, as in that grade 3 test I showed you earlier. And this one has exercises related to the reported and direct speech outcomes we looked at in the chart earlier. So we've got the different tenses of reported speech covered in the language in the first few exercises. And then in the third exercise, we've got the word work content, on teaching on contractions. So I started thinking how I might use these tests differently for grade 6 students rather than lower division or middle division students. So again, while you might find it useful for students to take these tests in a summative end of unit way, there may also be a benefit for them to do these in a more formative way after they've done the language and word work content, but before they did the writing section of the unit. So for example, if the writing task would benefit from students reinforcing particular language skills, this might be a really useful time to do it. So in this particular unit, the writing task is a story, which is likely to use reported or direct speech. So by doing the test before students finish the unit, before they did their final writing piece, you could reinforce these skills which the students would need to exhibit in their writing. So it's a nice way of developing their skills for the end of unit content, of the writing content. Also, because students are at grade 6 towards the end of their primary education, I was thinking it might be nice to use these in a more summative way, especially when we become to these units such as this one towards the end of the school year, unit 10. So I thought if your students sit an end of primary test, which I think is the case for most students now, it might be very useful for them to take these tests after each unit and keep them in a folder somewhere. And then at some point before they take their final test, as part of the revision process you might do, they can get these tests out, look through them, find any areas they did struggle with, and they can look back over those sections in the textbook. So it's a focused way of revising on exactly what they feel they are less confident in before any final tests they might sit. So that's another way of using these and making them as useful as possible to your students. So I'm sorry, I've run a bit short today. I'm about at the end. I've got one more slide, which is has a few more tips from me, but really it's for you to share any more ideas you have now. So I'll look back through the chat because I've seen lots of people putting more things in. So thanks for that. And please add anything else you might like to add before we finish, and I'll share some of these and give a few last thoughts from myself. So just scrolling back through the chat. Joan, thanks for your comment. I've used book 5 and believe that it aligns with the NSC curriculum and has been revised to prepare students for PEP examination. In my opinion, the book fosters critical thinking. I agree, Joan. I think that's a really valuable tool of these books. They absolutely foster critical thinking from the start, I think, but then develop those critical thinking skills for students as they progress. Thank you. Emelita, our students at the grade 5 use that text. Oh, for their literature studies, a boy, a cow named Boy. That's interesting. I think it's a really nice literature text. Daisy, thank you. Helps us organize reading lessons in a clear and structured way. I agree. And Daisy, as you can see in the books, as all of you know, most of that's set out for you in the textbooks. But if you wanted any additional content, it's available for you. So please do have a look through it and use what you think might be useful. Emelita, interesting ways to assess their comprehension of the story. I think so too. You've got a good way in with these tasks before the reading, and then you've got lots of ways of, as you say, of assessing their comprehension and focusing on the language and word work that you might pick up in the unit. Anices, thank you. I've used this series over several years of teaching, and I love and enjoy the series. That's brilliant. It matches the NSC 100%, and my students always enjoy using the book. Thank you for that. I'll pass it on to Leonie and Julia too. We're still in a lot of contact, and I know they love hearing things like this, and they love to know that you were using the books and finding them useful. I agree too. I think they're really well tailored to the curricula, and it's so important for you as teachers to know that everything you need covering is being covered. And again, these additional resources you can be confident using them, knowing that they're not extra in terms of anything different, but they're ways of reinforcing that same content. So thank you. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
Uh, Judith, I think you mentioned for Emilita earlier that you would go over the access quickly, so that could be something to do. And just to add that I will be putting a link to a YouTube video that explains really clearly and has the code for the language tree. So has instructions for accessing as well. So I'll put that on for everyone to access afterwards.
Good, and thank you for reminding me. Yes, I'll just skip back through the slides now and we'll look again at how to access these materials. So here we go. So this is are you seeing? No, sorry, I went a bit far. There we go. This is the one that Macmillan has provided for teachers. So, I mean, we can leave this up for a few minutes if you want to try this now, and then you can ask us if you've got any questions or if anything goes wrong. But you need to go to the Macmillan Education site, .com site as it is at the top. And then you'll see, and if you haven't registered previously, you would have to register. So it might take you a bit of time. Or if you can just log straight in. Then you're looking to add a new course if you haven't already done so and enter the code that you're shown. And then you're looking to find the bookshelf where you should find that the resources for that. And if I remember the first time I did this, I do think it was available relatively quickly. Is that right, Elliot? Teachers shouldn't have to wait too long. If they put the code in, the material should be there.
It should appear right away.
Brilliant.
If you put the code in, it should go straight onto your bookshelf.
So has everyone been able to do that, or has there been accessibility problems for anyone else we might try and resolve at this time? I see one more from Emelita, just because we're on this topic. It asked about registering if you do not have a login pass. There's nothing specific people need for that. Is that right, Elliot?
Yeah, so you will need to register the first time that you use it, but that is just an email address and a password. So as soon as you've made your account, you'll be able to log in really easily every time.
Okay, thank you. So maybe have a few more goes now while we're talking about a few other things and get back to us if there are any problems. There is that help center. If I just go on one more slide, I'll come back to this slide, but just to say, oh, I suppose you have got to have accessed it by then, but there is the help center for more information, which you may be able to find elsewhere on the MME website. So I've seen a few more comments pop up, so I'll just go back to those. Anices, again, thank you. I trust Macmillan Books 100%. I try to use as much Macmillan text as possible. They cater for all levels of students. That's amazing. Thank you. I hope you'll find the online resources as useful as well. Denise, thank you. I'd like to know when these books will be available in Jamaica. Okay, can I pass that to you, Elliot? I think I'm not too sure about that. If you're currently still using the second edition,
Yes,
yeah,
so I would expect them to be available from Kingston Bookshop. I would recommend you to contact Kingston Bookshop for current stocks, and they would be able to let you know if they've got them at the moment or when they would next have them.
great, thank you. You should, however, with these codes, be able to access the online resources at least. So that's something you might find helpful, although obviously they are tailored to the books. So perhaps it's best to wait till you've got everything. Good to see you've accessed it. I don't know, another one from Emelita. Does it need a specific school email? I think I just used my general work
Uh,
email when I popped it in.
no, it should be any email. Just when you're prompted to create an account, put in whichever your personal email, your school email, and set a password. And that'll be the password and the email that you use going forward. So it's up to you what the email you use and the password.
Great, thank you. Oh, good to see you're using the online resources. I think they're really good too. They're such a good extra alternative. Denise, that's a good point. Challenges with printing. I've come across that in a lot of schools, so hard copies would be really appreciated. Again, Elliot, correct me if I'm wrong, but for Belize, some of the teachers were saying the same in our last webinar, and we was it Alice? Yeah, it was Alice who said maybe also make sure your principal passes on a message. So the more times people hear this message, hopefully the more hard copies we'll be able to access for you. But I don't know if you'd agree or not.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that is a real challenge. So bear with us. We're trying. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? And if not, I'll go back towards the end. I just had a few more suggestions for you. Okay, I'll skip ahead to my final slide. But please feel free to keep putting comments or questions in the chat. Okay.
Just to specify for people like Venice who are based in Jamaica, there
Mhm.
is a Jamaica specific version of Language Tree which matches the NSC, and there's also Language Tree Pan Caribbean or for other curricula.
Oh, thanks for that. That's interesting. So a lot of those resources, as I understand, would be very similar, but some might have been tailored specifically for the Pan-Caribbean series. So yeah, worth again having a look, seeing what's appropriate for the Jamaican series too. Okay. So just before I finish, again, I'd strongly encourage you to just have a look through these materials and hopefully everyone will be able to access them finally. So just take up some time one day, look through the material for your grade when you have a bit of time. Yes, initially it will take some time, but I hope in the long run this will save you time that you would have spent on creating your own additional resources because there's lots of good content available for you. And I definitely have a think when I look through them about any specific students I had for my classroom who may benefit from using these different options and how they access the learning. So see what we've already put together for you, which will hopefully help them and again will save you some time. And for example, if you did have any students who you knew were going to be out of school for a long period of time, these are readily available for you to provide, print off and give to them, send home on top of any other work you might set. So a couple more
Just another
questions. Sorry,
question
yeah. Do you want to pick those up,
about
Elliot?
availability. So Emilita, if you are looking for availability in St Kitts, I'd recommend you to contact RJ Laws, who'd be able to tell you when they have it. I'm sure they would have it in stock at the moment, but if not, they could tell you when they would next have it as well.
Thanks, Elliot. Okay, if there's not much more, and just a big thank you from me for attending. I hope this has helped to introduce the materials to you. I hope you'll get the chance to look through them and have a go at using some of them to support your teaching, and that it might have given you a few different suggestions if you do already use them. So, thank you from me. Again, sorry I've run a bit short. I wish I had shown a few more grades now. But yeah, take the opportunity when you can and have a look through, and I hope you find them useful. And I hope that you get book stocks as soon as possible too.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. I feel like I've learned plenty as well that I can share with teachers as I meet them. Uh, just to end on a couple of final practical points. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel. That's the Macmillan Caribbean YouTube. Um, and alongside the webinar, there are instruction videos for those of you who still need a bit of help with accessing the teacher resources. So you can see the code and exactly how to go into the site and access everything on there. And everyone will be getting a certificate which will be emailed to you after the session as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again from me. I hope to see some of you on my travels in Belize or elsewhere in the future. And I really hope you get a lot out of these and continue using Language Tree. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Judith. I will end the webinar now. I'll let everyone get their messages in and I'll end the webinar.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Elliot.